Hello and welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon and today I'm giving my on-second thought on The Cable Guy. Now, this is your spoiler warning. If you haven't seen it yet for whatever reason, you should pause the video, go watch it, come back, and we can talk about it then. So in case you don't know, The Cable Guy is a 1996 film directed by Ben Stiller, starring Jim Carrey, Matthew Broderick, and Leslie Mann. The movie follows Matthew Broderick's character as he gets tormented by the crazed and deranged cable guy played by Jim Carrey. It starts out in a seemingly perfectly innocent friendship that gets stranger and stranger and darker. And honestly, that's a good way to describe this movie, is that it seems kind of normal and then gets weirder and weirder and darker. And it being so strange and so dark is a big part of the reason why it didn't do so great when it first came out. It did okay making money, but it was an extremely expensive movie to make, including $20 million just going to Jim Carrey. And that record-breaking $20 million contract that Jim Carrey signed for this role was another reason that this movie didn't do as well, because it set the new bar for how much lead actors were supposed to get paid for movies, and all the other studios were furious. And so several studios actually ran misinformation and smear campaigns against this film. And then on top of that, there's the lawsuit. Judd Apatow actually wrote the original script. Now, it did get rewritten and changed a couple times before it was made into a movie, but he still thought that he deserved some of the credit. He ended up losing the suit, but it was still more bad publicity that was surrounding this film that already had a dark cloud hanging above it. And then we come to the question of who actually directed this movie. Ben Stiller obviously directed it and was obviously credited for it, so what am I talking about? Well, just the fact that there's a rumor that Jim Carrey actually directed a lot of this movie. Judd Apatow and Jim Carrey both agreed that they wanted a darker, thriller-based horror comedy. Ben Stiller just wanted to make a happy satirical comedy, whereas Jim Carrey, as we see in most art that he does now, wanted to look into more of the dark, sinister side of things. Jim Carrey didn't want to just tell jokes with this movie, he wanted to look more into a character study. It's a much more serious and dark take. In fact, Jim Carrey and Judd Apatow both wanted him to die at the end of the movie when falling onto the satellite. However, that's one of the few things that Jim Carrey couldn't get away with. And so with this weird new style of dark comedy that people weren't ready for, the movie wasn't really a hit. Some critics, including Gene Siskel, actually thought that it was very good, but that was not the average consensus. And so that's why we're left now with a cult classic, because this movie was ahead of its time. The audience wasn't ready for it yet. But ever since, it's grown more and more in popularity every year. Every year, more people love it. And I'm one of the people that jumped on this bandwagon. I think this movie is great. And I just think that it's a shame that for years, this has been considered Jim Carrey's first mistake, his first big misstep as a comedian. It's just not true. I would honestly put this in my top 10 favorite Jim Carrey movies. I think it's great. It's not his best movie of all time or anything, and it's definitely for a very specific audience, but it's also very good for that specific audience. But I've only talked about Jim Carrey so far in this movie. Let's talk about the rest of the movie. As I mentioned previously, the rest of the cast includes Matthew Broderick and Leslie Mann, but it also has small roles by Ben Stiller and Jack Black. Now, on the topic of Matthew Broderick, I think he's a horrible actor. I'm being serious. I don't like him. I don't think he's good in anything I've seen him in. He's just bad, and this movie is no exception. Leslie Mann, however, I just think is one of the funniest women to ever live. She's actually one of my favorite actresses of all time just because of her comedic ability. And I think she's great in this movie, as well as Ben Stiller in his limited role and Jack Black in his limited role. Really, the main focus of this movie revolves around Jim Carrey and Matthew Broderick. And like I said, Jim Carrey is great in this role, Matthew Broderick not so much. But luckily, between the two of them, Jim Carrey is the focus. It's mainly just Matthew Broderick's character reacting to Jim Carrey being weird and Jim Carrey. So it's actually a dynamic that plays to the strengths of these actors, because Jim Carrey, of course, is great at eating the scene, and Matthew Broderick isn't great at doing much of anything, so as long as you can just limit him to reacting to somebody else, that's probably the best thing you can do. Now, there are some moments in this movie where he's supposed to act impassioned or emotionally about something, and he doesn't do great in those moments. But they are limited, they are few, and they are far between, luckily. And he's the weakest part about this movie easily, because honestly, I don't really have any other complaints about this movie. I know, it's a weird movie, some of the comedy doesn't land, and it's just a strange premise. But the strangeness and the darkness is part of why it's so endearing. And it is true that not every joke in this movie lands, but how many comedies do you know like that? There aren't many, and at least this movie tries, because the jokes come fast. There's barely any chance to catch your breath between a dramatic moment and a comedy moment. You're either knee-deep in the melodrama of it all, or you're cracking up at something ridiculous. So all around, I think that this movie is really good. Is it perfect? No, it's definitely not, but it's definitely entertaining. And it's original and strange, and that's good enough for me. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and of course, don't forget to like, share, and if you're new here, subscribe. Thanks, guys. Bye.